We are talking the slasher movie Scalper, and this is written and directed by Ferrin. And this is actually a sequel to another movie called Nightcaller, which is also directed and written by Ferrin. So it's kind of a direct sequel, to be honest, and it would help if you have seen the original movie, but I think it is still accessible if you have not seen it, because I think you can still kind of digest it as its own movie, because it has largely a different kind of like antagonist, and there's a few new characters and things like that. Now, the original Nightcaller was a kind of sleazy kind of slasher movie, which was obviously influenced by the kind of like the kind of the slasher and crime movies of the late 70s and 80s. And this is kind of more of the same, although I think this movie does offer a little bit more in some ways as well. Now, the story focuses on this character called Clementine, who is effectively a psychic and kind of like a medium, and she has used her kind of powers, so to speak, in the last movie to try and track down this serial killer. And now we have an instance where there seems to be a copycat serial killer. His MO is a little different, but it's kind of a similar sort of situation. And this copycat killer is kind of targeting Clementine and her family and kind of friends and things like this. And we have, a kind of a new set of characters, including Jake Busey's detective, who are kind of trying to stop this kind of killer, who is very, very violent. And we have Clementine once again using her psychic abilities to communicate with the other side to try and get clues from kind of past victims about who this kind of killer is. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about it. Now, this is a low-budget movie, much like its kind of predecessor. And I think it's clearly made for fans of movies like Maniac and kind of things like that. So, you know, I think it definitely has that appeal. It has that kind of, it's just that kind of grindhouse aesthetic to it. There's kind of like cigarette burns on the kind of like the film print and all of that. So it kind of has that kind of retro feel, even though it is a movie taking place in modern day. There were a few character moments here that I thought are really good. I really enjoyed the character of Clementine in the original movie, and the same is true here. Now, even the fact that she has supernatural powers, she's kind of like a clairvoyant, spirit medium, whatever you want to call it, I still found her character incredibly grounded, and the way she kind of uses this gift, so to speak, I thought came across as sort of sincere and like a very like interesting and grounded character in a lot of ways, and that performance and the way the character is kind of written and performed makes her for an intriguing protagonist, because she just kind of seems quite real. She's fallible, you know, she gets kind of upset, she kind of, it weakens her, but she seems very like down to earth and a kind of relatable kind of person. And I have to say, the same is true of peripheral characters, kind of supporting characters. There's these two cops, one of which is played by, say, Jake Busey. And I quite like the way these characters are portrayed. They're not over-the-top stereotypes. Like, for example, Jake Busey and his kind of female partner, they're really kind of like, well, I don't really believe in all this kind of supernatural, spirit medium and stuff, but what harm could it do to kind of look into it? You know, what's it going to cost us? You know, nothing really. And I quite like that. It just seems a very kind of like middle of the road and subtle, and probably quite kind of like, again, grounded in realistic, idea of what people would be like. They might not necessarily, think, oh, yes, it's definitely going to be a winner. But what harm could it do to have a look into it? We're going to be no worse off if we actually kind of look into these kind of claims. And it just seemed, I don't know, I liked it. I like that kind of idea. The movie's killer is also very, very vicious. Now, it's lacking a little bit in gore, I will say. But, for example, the first kill, which is within the first few minutes of the movie, we have this killer who is kind of masked and stuff, and he basically is effectively multiple stabbing some guy's anus, like repeatedly, and then scalps him. It's kind of like, now that I felt, it's pretty kind of like, close to the knuckle in many ways, and there's quite a lot of victims here. He has this thing where he ends up kind of taking the face, like skinning someone's face off a particular kind of victim, and then from that point on he's kind of wearing this person's face a little bit like kind of, you know, Leatherface and stuff. So again, it has that very seedy and kind of like exploitation kind of feel to it, and that I sort of quite enjoyed. And the movie, you know, as I say, it's got a reasonable amount of kind of kills in it, so you're never kind of like hanging around too long before, you know, you'll see the kind of like this, the depravity on screen again, if that makes sense. I think the movie is shot a little better. There are still a few kind of technical issues here and there with kind of like sound design and things, but the movie is shot better. One of the issues I had with the original movie was incredibly dark, and there are a couple of sequences which are shot in like, you know, low light. But I feel overall the movie's cinematography is better than the kind of the original film. I think the movie's pacing is also far better, as I've mentioned. It really does seem like the movie has the way it's been paced with the kills and the kind of the reveals and kind of the character moments. You get a lot more throughout the movie rather than kind of like these moments after kind of a lot of, you know, inaction and things like that. So that I kind of quite enjoyed. I think the killer is intriguing, and it's kind of one of these films where you're not knowing who the killer is necessarily. I quite like the reveal, I have to say, and I actually guessed wrong about who it was. It's one of these films I don't think it's particularly, you know, predictable necessarily, but also when the answers come, I think, oh, do you know what? Fair enough. That's quite a good idea about, you know, maybe, you know, the connection and things like this. And the movie also kind of leans more into the supernatural than the original film. So we have, you know, our character of Clementine interacting far more with these kind of spirits. Now, I don't necessarily think that particularly worked, if you want my honest opinion, but it does give the movie a little bit more, you know, of a kind of identity and kind of originality, so to speak. So it isn't just a slasher. We have lots of it, and then they're always played for laughs, to be honest. There are a couple of amusing moments. We have these kind of like these ghosts, for example, who Clementine can talk to, and the ghosts are trying to communicate with other people, but they can't sort of speak to them and stuff. And there's other frustration, like Clementine's father is in danger, and one of these ghosts that Clementine's kind of interacts with is going, oh my God, come and see me, so I can kind of warn you and things like that. But then the dad obviously can't kind of see and things. And then we have this weird sequence where we kind of go into this ghost world. I don't really think that was necessary, and I think it made the film a little cheesy, to be honest. But, you know, again, it gives it a little bit more, you know, there's a little bit more to it to a certain degree. So that, you know, that's it. There's some fun kind of like recognisable faces, some character actors. You've got Ling in here, Robert Milano, as I mentioned, Jade Busey and things like that. So there's a few recognisable faces. Let's talk about what doesn't work. As I've said, I don't know if this kind of like the more overt kind of like ghost elements seemed a little goofy to me, if I'm honest, and a little hokey, considering on how kind of brutal the killer is. These things felt like silly by comparison. So for me, those tonal differences kind of stuck out. And then the killer, as I've mentioned, I think it just lacks a little bit gore. So we'll take that first scene again. He's basically bending this guy over and shoving a large kind of like probably 10-inch blade up the guy's anus. And we, you know, there would be blood pouring out, but there's nothing. We get a little bit of blood on the blade, but it's like multiple times as well. So it's like you're missing a little bit on the kind of the gore here, to be honest with you. I mean, there are some okay effects when he's actually scalping, apart from horrible wigs. Horrible wigs. I don't know why it is they decided to go for the god-awful wigs. It's one of the complaints I had from the last movie, and they still haven't fixed it for this one. Horrible, obvious, kind of fake-looking wigs. There you go. But there are a couple of reasonable effects. As I mentioned, there's a character who gets their face skinned, and that looks pretty effective, as both the mask and the kind of the skinned face. The effects are kind of a mixed bag. As is the acting. I think some of the kind of the performances are perfectly fine, but there are a couple of like maybe hokier kind of line deliveries and things, a little bit kind of silly, and as I mentioned, a little bit cheesy at times. And there's one or two still kind of like just rough and ready kind of like technical issues with this film. But it's a lower budget film, so I think part of it is by design to give it this kind of like this grindhouse kind of feel, this kind of sleazy exploitation style of cinema. Very much aping that kind of, as I said, that late 70s, early 80s kind of style. But some of it I just think is probably low budget and quick filmmaking. So there you go. But overall, I quite enjoyed this film. I think it has a lot of personality, a lot of charm, and I really like the character moments. You know, that the characters here were so well realised and so likeable and so kind of relatable. Even our killer I found quite intriguing, despite the fact that we really don't know much about him until the end. So for that, I actually will give this one a 7 out of 10. I actually quite enjoyed this one, but be warned, it is a little rough and ready. So have you seen it? Have you seen the original Nightcrawler? Please do let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.